All right. Well, thank you, Victoria and Nicole, for inviting me to join you today. So I'm joined here today by my colleague Emma as well, and we put together a presentation to talk to you a little bit about, elevating the participant, digital participant experience and how that will actually drive your engagement and retention of participants. So just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Basil Durnan. I'm part of our customer experience team here at CareEvolution. My email address is here on the screen now, and I will share these slides after today's presentation with all of you. Just to go over a little bit of what I hope to cover today, and thank you, Nicole, for that introduction. So you're absolutely right. Hoping to hit on a few things today. So definitely want to talk about digital best practices, and we're actually going to start off with just a demonstration. We're going to dive right into survey design and the app experience, talking about some of the digital best practices that you can build into your projects, whether you use MyDataHelps or not. And I'll talk about what MyDataHelps is, since I don't believe everyone here is using it, although I know a lot of people at Michigan are. And then after we do some demonstrations, we'll actually come back and we'll kind of review why do these digital best practices work? And then we'll close with some Q&A and I'll share some resources. So as I'm going through this today, really encourage all of you, please just put your questions into the chat. I may not answer them as I'm going along, but it'll be helpful for you to not forget your questions so that by the time we get to Q&A, hopefully we'll have a nice list of things to go through. All right, so let me switch over here. So what I'm looking at right now is called MyDataHelps Designer. And again, I know not everyone at Michigan is using MyDataHelps platform. And just a quick blurb about what MyDataHelps is for those of you who are unfamiliar. So MyDataHelps is a digital clinical trial and research platform, much like REDCap. So it's a way for you to send surveys and have participants complete those surveys and receive that data back. You can also send notifications such as email or SMS text messages. You can also collect wearable data or electronic health records through MyDataHelps. Participants use MyDataHelps either through the web or an Android or iOS app. And then the study team will use MyDataHelps Designer to configure and manage their projects. And again, what you're looking at right now is called MyDataHelps Designer. So I'm not going to talk, not going to go into every single feature of MyDataHelps Designer or MyDataHelps today. Again, I just really want to focus on the survey experience, or excuse me, survey design and app experience. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that right now. So I'm going to start off with surveys, and this is just showing you a list of surveys that we have in this example workspace that we created for you today. And I actually wanted to start off by showing you some surveys that we often see that are, not necessarily things that are done at Michigan, but we see some other study teams do when it comes to digital research. One of them is really just dropping participants into a survey without any context. A theme I'm going to return to a lot today is this idea of what would you do if you were in person with a participant, and kind of making sure that you're doing those similar things with them, even though it's over a digital medium. So oftentimes we wouldn't just say to a person like, walk up to a random participant in clinic, hand them a survey and walk away, right? Much like you're doing here, right? We have actually seen people who just send out surveys that say, are you 18 or old? And you're like, what is this study for? Why am I answering this question? What is this about? You're not providing any context for these participants here. I'm just going to step through this survey pretty quickly here as an example. But this is really kind of pretty basic in terms of what it's asking, just some basic questions. This is actually ultimately a consent survey that's here. You wouldn't know that necessarily off the beginning if you're a participant just completing this. There isn't a lot of personality here. There isn't a lot drawing you into this. So what I think I want to touch on pretty early is what could this look like if we improved upon it? So this is another survey here. It's actually very similar to the one you just saw, and this actually provides a lot more context. And apologies, I should have just said this at the beginning. Again, for those who aren't familiar with MyDataHelps, this is actually the survey builder. This is a preview in the middle of what you actually will see when you get into a survey as a participant. You can see all the different steps here on the left, and then on the right, this is where you can kind of configure what your survey will look like. Anyway, coming back to this, some changes that we immediately make to this kind of survey, rather than just starting with, are you 18 or older, we add a study logo. So that gives the person a nice visual cue to actually have this relationship and understand, oh, I'm part of this study. There's the longitudinal heart study. That's this link that I just happened to follow is actually bringing me to this study that I'm going to be a part of. And then really taking some time to explain to them, like, what is this study about, right? Our goal is to bring together as many people as possible to help us better understand heart health. We appreciate you considering our research study, giving them some expectation of what's going to happen now. We're going to check their eligibility. We're going to give them an overview of what will go on in this study. And if they agree to join, then we'll actually have them sign consent. And that last piece there as well, estimated time. If you're in clinic and, you get a survey or a consent to sign, you can generally see, how many pages is this? I have a sense of how long this is going to be. When it's digital, you don't have that same amount of like appreciation for how long something's gonna be. So saying that upfront to the person, it really gives them something to know what to expect. All right, so I'm going to step through this. One other thing you'll see that we've done here, not just including the logo on different pages for your study, but we actually have a theme color, right, which is kind of tying this all together and creating sort of this visual brand that we have for the participant to kind of start connecting to. And then, yes, we have the consent, and you can see on this last page here, something else I want to hit on is this idea of just being able to thank the participant and celebrate them a little bit, right? I think sometimes we'll just say like, okay, survey submitted, and you just bring them right back to the dashboard afterward, and they're like, okay, I guess I'm done with that survey, right? Say, hey, you're actually done with this survey. Welcome, you've joined our study. We're glad that you're here. Reinforce why they're here, right? That you're with your contribution, we hope to understand heart health better, improve their lives, and so on. I think this is a really key piece too, is really trying to bring back that there's a study team here as well, right? That you're not just this faceless entity, right? If you're in clinic with someone, there's a face there already. You don't have to introduce yourself. You probably already have. But when it's digital, you don't have that same immediate connection with someone. And I recognize, a lot of teams are turning over different people who are working on these studies, but just being able to say, hey, there's a team behind this study helps to give someone some appreciation for how they can connect with that. So a few other things that I would like to show off when it comes to surveys. One other thing I just want to kind of quickly plug here is, I showed you kind of how you can do this overview of surveys. There are lots of other ways you can go about it. There are some surveys in our survey library, which I can show you in a moment here, that have things like this, where you can have these really nice visuals to show you how long is this going to take? What will I be asked? How is this helpful? All this can be really upfront in a really nice visual way. Doesn't just have to be text-based. And I think it's also nice to give people some heads up as well, such as, hey, we recognize like a paper one, you can just kind of put it down. Maybe you need to go to the bathroom real quick, come back. People get interrupted all the time on digital studies, whether they get a phone call, right, and they're on their phone and then you take something. So I think just trying to say to people, like, it's okay if you get interrupted. It's also a really nice thing to tell participants.
Last time the filter was changed.
And I know I just mentioned it, so I do want to touch on it briefly here. We do have our survey library for those of you who are using MyDataHelps Designer already. Hopefully you're familiar with this. Those of you who aren't, this is a really great place to come in and just look at a bunch of template surveys that already exist. And you can click on them and import them if you want to play around with them as well. Some other things to point out when it comes to surveys. This is an example of a survey that really is actually multiple surveys combined into one. So over here on the left are all the different steps here. You can see I can click and kind of jump around to see these different steps. So this is the RFQ survey. You can see down here we have an NEO survey, then we have a PCQI survey, then we have a PHQ survey, we have the Pansy, it goes on and on, the GAD, and so forth, right? This is a lot of surveys that put into one survey, right? This is the equivalent of walking over to a person with a stack of 10 surveys, slapping on their lap and walking away, right? That really creates a lot of cognitive burden on the person to be like, oh my goodness, I have so many surveys to complete. What you would instead do is try and deliver it piecewise, right? You would come and say like, hey, here's this survey, or I have 3 surveys for you to complete. Here's the first one, right? You try and make it piecewise so the person feels that sense of accomplishment as they're moving through their surveys. So in much the same way, if possible, we really encourage you to think about breaking up your surveys as much as possible. Certainly there are times, and I actually have another example of one. This is called a DSQ2 survey. This is a really long survey. You can see there are like I think it's about 120 questions or so here. I mean, there are sometimes validated instruments where it makes sense to have them all together, and that's perfectly fine, right? You can see right up front here, we say time to complete 1 hour. It's a big survey, right? And you probably want to have some communication around to say like, hey, we really want you to set aside some time for this, etc. But I just want to make the case like you don't need to always break them up in the chunk size. There are definitely situations where it makes sense to have it all be one survey. All right. And that's kind of what I want to show you on surveys. So again, just kind of going back here, I really think just adding a little bit of a, branding appeal, right? Icon, making sure you have the study name there as much as possible when you're having your surveys delivered, thinking about a theme here. And I'll just show you, for those of you who are using MyDataHelps Designer, you can actually come in here and just say use organization color now. So if you have a workspace, you can see in the top left here, I already have red for this webinar participant experience. We could have just used that actually as the organization color, and then that would actually populate across for the bar here you see at the top. or you could do that also for the next button along the bottom. You could use organization color. So a really easy way to just make sure all your surveys are very standard, have one color that you're using to kind of tie them together, rather than some that are blue, some are black, and the person's like, what is this study, right? I want to have one consistent experience.
Basil, I
All
have a
right.
question. Do you have
Yeah,
any
go ahead, Victor.
data on like how many questions or how much time to like is optimal for a survey? Is there like a natural drop off point after so many questions or so much time?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Victoria. And that gets a little bit back to when I was talking about this survey here and kind of setting up the expectation for participants. You know, I'll get into this a little bit later too about sort of how you order your surveys and being delivered to participants. I think that's really important, sort of building on them. We don't have like hard data to say like at 10 minutes, there's a steep decline, right? I think a lot of it comes down to what was the participant set up to expect? And then is there a mismatch between perception and reality? Right? If we are sending notifications out to a person saying, hey, just so you know, next week there's going to be this survey, it's going to be 1 hour. If you could find some time in your week, that actually sets up the person to say, like, okay, I need to set aside some time for this. So I think, I kind of want to sidestep that question a little bit, Victoria, to say, if there's a reason you're delivering these surveys, of course, you're not just sending out frivolous surveys to people. If you're finding there's a decline in completion rates for those surveys, you might want to think about how you're setting expectations for that, right? Making sure they know that these surveys are coming and what's expected of them is somewhere to revisit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me switch over now. So I'm in my project here. Again, apologies to those of you who aren't MyDataHelps designer natives here yet, I should say. But now I want to talk a little bit about the app experience. So I'm going to go over here to the app layout. And on this tab, we have a preview of actually what the MyDataHelps app will look like. And we say app, but that actually also applies if you're going to mydatahelps.org. If you're logging in through a browser or even a mobile browser, you'll get the very similar experience. So along the bottom here, there are different tabs. I'm sure if you're familiar with using apps like Instagram or news apps, this is very common in a lot of different apps where you can kind of toggle between different categories of different things within the apps. MyDataHelps is no different. And I actually have 5 tabs to start off, and I did this purposefully because I want to show you that there is a maximum number of tabs that you should think about when having your study. You can see here already with 5 that some of the names of these tabs are getting cut off, right? This one called symptoms, you can't really see the MS at the end, right? Resources gets cut off as well. There's no hard and fast rule about how many tabs you should have. I generally would think that an upper limit is 4. 3 is probably better because thinking back about like surveys and that cognitive burden, your eye doesn't know where to go if there's so many tabs, right? Like I'm looking here, I'm like 5 tabs, where should I be clicking? But if you have 3 tabs, it's a little more clear where you should be going and trying to keep that as condensed as possible. Now, I do have a lot of examples that I want to talk to you about today. So I do have these 5 up and I'm going to dive into each one a little bit. But again, just want to encourage you to think about 4 as an upper limit, but 3 is probably a better number. And 1 or 2 is also great. So please don't get that wrong. All right, so let me go ahead and show you the view builder here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this home. This is showing me the preview of our home tab that we have here. And you can see a preview of this. What I really want to talk to you today about is, these participant experiences, right? And a really key feature, at least within MyDataHelps, is the view builder. So you can see here it says custom view, build a view with the MyDataHelps view builder. And then there's this URL here. And I'll show you how you can kind of get to the view builder, but we're going to go ahead and click edit. And this will actually bring us to the view builder. Now this hopefully looks pretty similar to what you saw when we were in the survey editor, right? Where you saw a preview of your survey in the middle. You can kind of modify everything on the side as you would like and kind of make adjustments there. So this is no different really. Here you can see I can select on things. I can change my image if I want. I can change some of the text as well. You can kind of drag and drop different things to put them in here. But what I want to talk to you about, of course, is experience here. Again, we are trying to have these visual cues for participants. We have the icon up here, which I just want to first commend the Michigan teams. I think Michigan's really great at creating study icons and really want to encourage you all to keep doing that. So think about including those in your views as well. You can make things really personalized to the participant, right? Add a nice little touch to say welcome, and then we have demographics.first name. So This is actually called a demographic field that will show, and if I had a participant with their first name, in my case, Basil, it would say, welcome, Basil. If you're not familiar with MyDataHelps, demographic fields and then also custom fields work very similar to smart variables in REDCap. So these kind of fields that you have associated with participants that can get populated through surveys or instruments, and then you can actually dynamically show that text back to participants. And then we have here a task section. And so this isn't so much about the participant experience. I mean, it is in a way because the home tab is often what the person's going to land on. It's sort of your home page for your study when you come in. Why I really encourage you to think about putting tasks up top and first on your home tab is that's going to be the first thing your participant sees. And if it's something that you need your participant to complete, I assume it is, your survey data, you really want to put that up front. So really making sure that's first and foremost is going to help you in terms of getting participants to complete things. Some other things I'll just kind of point out with tasks is you kind of make these things sequential. So maybe you have an order in which your surveys are being delivered, you'd like them to be completed. Maybe you have surveys that are primary objective data, and then your next survey is for secondary objective data. Make sure you send that primary objective one first, and if you lock it by making it sequential, right, the person has to complete that primary objective data first before they can actually move on. So that's a way to make sure that you're getting the data that you need or prioritizing the data that you need. All right, and then moving through here, there's some other things you can do with the view builder as well. You can create cards that have actions. So clicking on this action will actually start a survey, and that survey is called Set Up Your Symptom Log. And I kind of want to point out this feature. There's something with MyDataHelps called Symptom Shark, where participants can actually enter their symptoms and treatments that they would like to track, and then they can log that on a daily basis. And I'm going to circle back to this in a moment about how they can view all that data. But just for now, I want to point out that you can have these actions that can actually start surveys. You can also open up URLs and other things, which we'll get to in a moment when we talk about resources. Now, one thing you'll notice is that this is inside of a conditional component. So this setup symptom log survey will actually populate a custom field called symptoms. It'll basically capture what symptoms is this participant tracking for this study. And if that is empty, as this logic has here, then it will show this set up your log, right? That means they haven't done it yet. So it'll show this. Conversely, if they now have it, if we're saying it is not empty, we can have them actually start to log their symptoms. And actually, this will then show up on their view, and they can actually click this and log it. And if they do that, I'll just show you a preview of what that looks like. It might look like something like this, where they can see their symptoms that they have and different treatments that they took for the day. They can also, use a smiley face scale to say how they're feeling, and then add some notes as well. And again, I'm going to circle back to how they can see more about this data. But wanted to just show off how you can do conditionals and kind of show and hide things, right? You don't want to have things that aren't applicable to the participant just sitting there waiting to be useful to the participant. You want them to show up once they become applicable to the participant. Again, just trying to streamline how much the participant has to look at before it becomes relevant to them. But where this is all building towards is really thinking, and Nicole put it well at the opening, is that we really want to think about returning information back to participants. So if I scroll up here, you can see I have this mood survey, and maybe this is the daily mood survey that gets delivered to participants. If there's a score associated with the survey, or maybe you're doing these PHQs with some frequency or other types of surveys that have scores with them, it's actually really interesting to return that data back to the participant. People are fascinated by their own data. I mean, lots of people are wearing, I'm wearing an Apple Watch right now. I like to see my data on a daily basis. I mean, if I'm completing these surveys, I don't just want to go into a black box and go into the ether and I never see it again. How cool is it to just be able to visualize that data right here with the mood score? So this, you can add charts to sort of return this information here as well. And just to show you how easy it is to build something like this, I'm actually just going to reproduce this view. And definitely if people have questions, please feel free to chime in as I'm going through here. But I'm just going to go ahead and click New. This brings up the different templates that we have. And I will show you some templates as we go through this as well. But I'm just going to start with a blank view so that we can go through and build this together. And while I'm building this, are there any questions that people have at the moment, or?
I had one. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this, but there was a meeting I attended at CareEvolution, and one of the things that came up is the Promise Cat survey. And we've had some investigators since then that were, well, there's a lot that are particularly interested in that survey. And I know that there's an API or at least at one point there was an API for the CAT survey to be integrated. And I was wondering if that's on the roadmap or if there's been any progress there.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Victoria. I did pass that along to our product team. It is not currently on the roadmap. I think we're still discussing what would go into supporting it at this time. But I'm happy to follow up with them and see if there's any more concrete updates and what's being planned there, but nothing as of yet. All right, jumping back here to the view builder. Hopefully you saw I created a section here. So sections and cards are just ways of grouping components together in a nice visual way. Sections just go the entire way across the screen, and cards kind of create these floating things, which you'll see in a second. I did drag and drop a graphic component and a text component over here. So I'm going to go ahead now and upload an image, and I'm going to go ahead and choose our study icon. And obviously that's pretty large to start. So I'm probably going to make that, 50 pixels wide. And then I'm going to add in here, maybe I'll just do, welcome. And then we're going to do this for, oops, if I can spell. Right, so now this will render for participant. If it's me, it'll say welcome Basil. And then we can have some other text, we appreciate you in this study, right? Something to that effect, and you can fill in some other information. And then next we had a survey list, the tasks, which I really encourage people to have. So I can just go in here and grab the survey task, drop it in below. And this is already showing a lot of surveys at the top. So I'm going to give a name to surveys. I probably want to just make this limit to 3. So I only want to have 3 surveys show at any time, right? Not to overwhelm a participant. Maybe I want to make it again so it's sequential so they can only complete them in order. And maybe I don't want them to see this at all. If they have no surveys due, they can actually just jump right into seeing their symptom log information or mood surveys. All right, and then next let's do the conditional that we had for our symptom survey. So I'm going to go ahead and create a conditional component here, and I will put a card inside. Inside that card, I will put an action. And this action will be to set up symptom log. And this will start a survey. That survey is called setup symptom log, as you can imagine. And maybe we want to add an icon here, right? We can choose a font awesome icon. I know there's one called Heart Circle Plus. Yep. Maybe I'll make that a little bit bigger. And maybe I want to add a little color to that, right? Give it a little bit of a red color for a heart. And I actually, sorry, I skipped over the conditional here. So this conditional will only show if custom field symptoms is empty. So they haven't actually done the symptom log yet, so this field is not going to be populated. So this will show up and they can click on this to launch that symptom log. And then the next thing that we had was to actually show where they can enter in their symptoms. So that's going to be under Symptom Shark. And that is just the log today. And I can give you a preview just to see what it looks like with no log. And I need to actually, I'm just going to copy the logic I had from before. And instead of if it is empty, I'm going to say if it is empty, then you can show this log today's symptoms. All right. And the last piece we had was this survey. So I'm going to add it down
Can
here
I
below.
ask a question about the symptom log?
Sure, please.
Are the symptoms, is there like a pre-designated or a researcher designated list that's limited? Can participants add symptoms that maybe aren't already that the researcher didn't think about?
Yeah, that's a great question, Victoria. So I'll try not to get too deep into it right now, but you certainly can. I'll just kind of highlight this line here. Whenever you're setting up the survey, and I can send out this link as well. You can actually say predefine some symptoms and treatments that you like to have. In this case, it could have fatigue, pain, and nausea. But then participants can still add their own as well. So that those ones would be there. They could remove them. They don't want it, but definitely a nice way to suggest things to people as well. Yep. Great question. So jumping back here, the last thing we're going to just do is that survey answer chart. So I'm going to drag and drop that in here. And we'll call this mood score. Oops. And maybe we want to make it area chart. And you can actually graph more than one. So maybe you're doing multiple surveys that are on similar score y-axis. You can add multiple series here. For this, I'm just going to do mood, and its result identifier from that survey is called score. And there it is. So pretty easy. I think you can see in just a few minutes, we can really put together a lot of visuals that are very dynamic and engaging to the participant and gives them some insight into their own data. Now, I did want to talk a bit about this symptom a bit more. So let me go back here, and I'm going to switch to another view now. So that was the home tab that we just did. And now this is the symptoms tab. Again, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to click edit to go to the view builder. And this is a really cool view because all those daily entries now show up in a calendar view. The pie chart is showing you the different symptoms for that day, and the dots above it are showing you colors that correspond to the symptoms. And you can also see that all down below here in this component. But what's really great about this view is that you can kind of toggle back by month. Look in December. I mean, this is just a preview of data, of course, right? It's all sample. You can also filter. So maybe a person just wants to see, when did I have anxiety and when did I meditate? And you can immediately see that on your calendar. So you might be collecting this data for your research purposes, but there's still a lot that persons can actually engage with their own data and get value that isn't just contributing to research, but is actually helping them inform them about their own health. And there's some other things down here as well, such as their daily overall experience. That's part of the Symptom Shark survey that you log each day. Like I mentioned, that smiley face scale. You can see the number of times they're feeling good, maybe a little more meh, and then not good. And I just want to point out this view, you don't actually need to build this. I mean, you can tweak it further, but if you go to our templates here, this is called the Symptom Chart Calendar. So you can select that, and then that'll bring up this view. And I didn't change anything from this template, so this is exactly what it is. All right. Some other things when we're talking about returning data to participants would be EHR data, electronic health records. So if you're collecting health records from participants, there's pretty much no reason, in my opinion, to just not make that data available back to them, right? I think we all know accessing MyChart, I think, is what Michigan Medicine uses. It can be a little complicated. You're jumping around, or maybe they're not just at Michigan Medicine. Maybe they're at some other clinic as well, and they use a different provider, and then they have their records in multiple different places. You can actually have them connect to all those different providers with MyDataHelps, and then they could see all that data in one area, right, combined. So they can see all their lab results from all their providers. They can see blood type, it's probably pretty simple, but medications, immunizations, and so forth. Down here at the bottom, they can actually see all the providers that they are connected to. And then, of course, they can connect to additional providers as well. And just show you a preview of this, once they're connected, it'll look like this to say we are receiving your EHR data. And, not maybe you don't need all of these. Maybe you don't feel like procedures really matter for the kind of participant population that you're working with. But you can go over here into the electronic health records category and kind of drag and drop whatever things you think might be beneficial to participants.
Basil, can you talk a little bit about how participants can connect their health record? Like, what's the source of the data? I know you touched on it a little bit, but I don't know if everyone understands that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Thanks, Nicole. So yeah, if you add in a prompt, it could either be through a survey with MyDataHelps, or as you see here, it can be part of a view where participants can come in and click Connect Provider. This will launch a survey where they can search for, and I apologize, I don't have a good preview readily available here. But they can actually just search for their provider through a list, type it in, search, and then when they select it, they're just prompted to log in. So for Michigan Medicine, I believe you use MyChart, or it's called or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But participants would just log in with that account, and then they would go through ethics, hey, are you sure you want to share this data? Which data do you want to share with MyDataHelps? And once they do all that, they're connected. It really takes very few minutes. I would even say more than 1 minute if they're kind of moving through it quickly. And then they can do that for all their different providers that they have, multiple accounts at multiple different providers.
Thank you. And sorry, one last question / comment. I know that you guys don't have control over what providers share EHR data, right?
Correct.
I guess what is the entity that providers have to go to if they want their EHR data available for this purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not actually an expert on sort of how they get into sharing their fire data, it's called. Certainly, I would say if participants have providers that they're not connected to, that's actually something we do a lot of CareEvolution is we will follow up with providers and kind of encourage them to make their data available for their participants. There's a lot of US law that's coming in effect over the next couple of years that's requiring providers to do that. So they already need to do that. And if they aren't yet, we are happy to actually reach out to a lot of providers. So if you ever find participants who are like, hey, I can't connect to my provider, really encourage you to send them our way. And actually, I see Vic is on. Vic, do you want to take that question a little bit further?
Yeah, really quickly, I think maybe Nicole, your question may be this little widget, we're focusing on how to incorporate it, but behind the scenes, there's about 16,000 US providers that we have built connections to. And that is the feature that is being invoked here. And that is under the information blocking mandate from CMS and Office of the National Coordinator. So effective 2021, every US healthcare provider needed to offer patients the ability to connect to their EHR data in an app of their choice. So while University of Michigan offers its patients Epic MyChart, it must also enable database access. So MyDataHelps has a connection. So whatever you're seeing largely in Epic MyChart, so it's a standard called USCDI, and it tends to have problems, medications, labs, observations, notes, all of those kinds of things. And we've done a fair amount of analysis. This particular widget provides access to those 16,000 or so distinct providers, which are represent about 90% of all US healthcare delivered annually. So it's a really big part of a component that's being embedded here. But from a researcher perspective, oftentimes we have access to our EHR data. But if these folks are traveling, if they are spending time during winter in Florida or elsewhere, and they have any healthcare interactions there, we encourage them to connect to that healthcare provider, and then the research team could have access to the holistic data. The final comment there is claims data is also accessible through this. So we're able to get Medicare fee-for-service claims, most Medicare Advantage programs, so any government program. So Medicaid, Medicare, CHIPRA, any CHIP plans, pediatric coverage plans, dual eligibles, and individual plans are all accessible here as well. So that provides some interesting endpoints if we're looking for ED utilization or inpatient visits that might be happening outside Michigan medicine. Typically, that would require some very interesting hand-to-hand combat to figure that out. So this is not meant to be, Shazam, it's all done, but some subset of patients, we find usually around 40 to 50% of the participants will do this. And that can be very valuable because then we don't have to do that manually.
Thanks, Vic. Perfect.
Do you have a data dictionary of what fields? We have a investigator that we've been working with that they're not sure if the EHR data will have the fields that they need for the study that they want, or if they need to get EHR data outside of a product like MyDataHelps.
Yes, there's a very detailed standard. I'll post it. Yep. That we can post a link in the chat in a moment.
Yeah, I'm sharing it up on the screen and just shared it as well.
Sorry for the detour. It's just a common question I've been getting lately about EHR data.
Well, happy to talk about it.
These FHIR resources is what our platform supports, but I think what we can expect to see from this thing called Smart on FHIR, this federal regulation, is slightly different. So that's going to be the US CDI, and I'll share that as an action item from this. There's a whole deck we have for that.
All right. Thank you for weighing in, Vic, and thanks for the question, Nicole. All right, so that's EHR. So again, lots of conversation about, connections to be made here, but I think I would really just want to encourage your teams to think about, if you are collecting EHR data, there is very little reason not to return that back to them, because there is some benefit. And exactly as Vic mentioned, if people are traveling and in different places, they can have access to all their data in one place with your study, while you, the researcher, are also gaining access to that data. Some other types of data that you can actually access. This is actually going to be an activity. So maybe not just health records, but also wearable data that participants have. This is a view here, and very similar to what you saw with symptoms. Participants can toggle back by month. You can see step data, sleep data, active time. I mean, this is probably a lot of charts, but trying to figure out what's relevant to your patient population, what they would like to see. At the bottom here is a list of, you can have a menu of connecting all the different devices. Perhaps not all of these are relevant to you. Maybe you're not doing a diabetes study, so you are not going to need to collect Dexcom data, for example. But you can also add some additional components about devices. Something I do want to point out with device data, though, I think is really great, is there's really a lot of different data types, as anyone who's working with wearables know. We do have a section for unified data, and what that means is whether you're using a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, this chart here will actually be able to pull steps from either device. But if you're just distributing, say, Fitbit for your site, you can go down to the section that just has Fitbit data, right? And maybe you want to just focus in on Fitbit data for your study if you're distributing that. So definitely encourage you to think about the different data types and not go too deep on all these different charts you can have, but really think about what's going to be valuable to the participant. What are the kind of insights that you're capturing for the study that you could return back to them? Something that's also very cool about charts is that you can add thresholds. So data doesn't just have to be informational in terms of what you're turning back to them, but you could think about helping participants set goals for themselves. Oops, typo there. But you could think about having a threshold value of 7,000. Maybe that's 7,000 steps that a person is trying to get to as a goal. You can actually show this as a reference bar. And you can actually see these color, the bars that go over this threshold change color, right? So it's very easy at a glance for the person to see, like, how many times did I meet that goal today? This actually supports what's called piping. You click this link to get some additional information. But essentially what this means is you can use custom fields, much like you would use a smart variable RightCap. So I can do custom fields step goal. And now for each participant, if they have their own step goal, that will be their threshold. Maybe I want to set mine a little bit higher. Maybe someone wants theirs a little lower. And then I'll get to see if I'm meeting my goal or not. And you can take this a little bit further as well. And now I'm just going to add in here, maybe you want to actually have them be able to edit their goal, right? So maybe we can say edit step goal. And this could start a survey. And that survey could be, edit step goal. And maybe I want this to have an icon. And let's just do a pencil for editing. Right, so right below where they see their step goal, right, they could edit they see their steps. They could edit their step goal so that they could update that threshold value that they see. So a lot of things you can really bake in here. There's a lot of different directions you can go with all this. You can also think about heart rate zones, right? Maybe you don't want to go too low or too high, right? Participants want to kind of stay in a sweet spot, so you can have multiple thresholds, right? So you can have a lower bound threshold and an upper bound threshold. There's a lot of different things you could think about with this. But definitely encourage you to think about returning this data if you're collecting wearable data as well, because a lot of people are already wearing wearable devices because they are interested in this data. So why not give it back to them? All right, and then the last view that I want to touch on is a pretty simple one, but it's called resources. So this is, basically just a list of different action components, and each of these just opens up a URL. You can see this one goes to heart.org and has some sort of news about it. You can present these within the app if you're familiar with that. It doesn't take them over to the mobile device's web browser, but just keeps them within MyDataHelps app. So it kind of creates a modal pop-up for that. But you can see, you can just list all these out. But I also want to encourage teams to think a little bit more outside the box. And it's not just URLs that you can have be open up, but you can actually have people do phone calls. So if they click this call us, if they're on a device capable of making a call, it would call this phone number. So if they need to get in touch with you, the study team, really encourage you to kind of put this into your views that you're creating. Additionally, you can create emails, right? You can use the mail too and have, research at distinguisheduniversity.edu. Click on that and it will open up an email on their device to actually email you, of course. So this is really great. And if you're interested in these resources, again, we have a lot of different templates here under the View Builder. There's one called Resources, pretty plain and starter pack for you, but you can come in here and it has a list of 5 different actions, and you kind of come in here and fill out your URLs. Maybe you want to add some different icons, things like that. All right. So let me go back to our slides. So just to kind of bring it all back now and think a little bit about why do these digital best practices work? I mean, as you all know, as study coordinators, really it comes down to participant motivation about what's going to keep them in the study. Kind of innately, it begins with alignment, right? These participants are interested in furthering health science, right? Because they often are affected by these things themselves. So that's kind of an easy place to start for them. But it also really comes back to that relationship that they have, that they want to know their research team. They want to know that you're competent, respectful, and appreciative of them. And that it's not just about what they're doing for you, but they are actually getting some value themselves. So it's not just incentives, whether that's money that they're getting or they're keeping a device. Maybe they're getting some therapeutic care on these clinical trials, but they're actually getting some other value, right? We talked a lot today about returning information back to participants. We also touched on, these resources you can provide to them that are very helpful in them managing diseases that they might have. And of course, this all goes together to create their experience that they have, right? Between this relationship and the value that they're getting. And that is what's going to drive your engagement or retention. And, while some things are different with going digital, right? And actually maybe expands a little bit in terms of what we can return in information. These principles are the same as if you were doing a brick and mortar trial, right? These participants are coming in, they want to know who you are, have a strong relationship with you, and then get some value out of the trial. And that's going to keep them coming to clinic and participating in your research. And just to dive a little bit deeper into a little bit of a relationship, branding really sets the stage for that relationship. It creates familiarity, right? We talked a lot in that survey about, I see these visual cues of the color, I see the visual cues of the icon. That's going to help me feel like I'm creating a relationship with something where maybe you're not seeing these participants, right? They know that there's a team behind this, that this study is supported. You can really keep it simple, right? Just have the study name. You can have a basic logo. I think, again, Michigan's been really great about having logos in all their studies and really trying to keep a consistent study branding color across the app. Keeps that nice visual branding together. And, this isn't really so much engagement and retention, but a benefit of having branding is that it makes it shareable as well, right? If your participants are part of patient communities, they may actually say, hey, I'm part of the Michigan Compass study, right? I get to get access to this Headspace app and track my mood score over time and see how I'm doing. That really makes it really easy for other persons to like, oh, Compass, let me go explore what that is, right? So making sure you have some branding also helps with some recruitment, which of course is, is another obstacle to overcome oftentimes in clinical research. And then when we think about building a digital relationship, it's really no different than when you're in person, right? You want to demonstrate your competence. It's very easy to just drop someone into a survey that's digital and say like, are you over 18? But really make sure the person understands like what is going to be asked and why it's being asked, right? Why is this important to the research? You want to show respect to them, tell them how long that survey is going to take, right? Again, we talked about, when you're digital, you can't just see how many pages there are to a survey or how many questions there are. So you need to say that up front to the participant. You also don't want to just hand them a stack of, surveys to complete. You want to make it a little more piecewise so they feel like they're accomplishing getting through things. And of course, display appreciation for them, right? You want to reinforce why they completed this, thank them for their time, and you can also do a small celebration if appropriate. But the big thing that we launched in today was really thinking about how we can return valuable information to participants, right? This is really beneficial because, whether you're building it for one participant or 10,000, what we just did today, the effort doesn't really change. Just a few clicks and I was able to put together visualizations that would benefit any number of participants. And it really comes as a negligible cost, right? It's just a few minutes of your time to go in and configure this. And anyone who's using MyDataHelps already has access to this tool, and really encourage every study to be thinking about using the View Builder on their research if you're using MyDataHelps. Oh, Vic, go ahead.
I just wanted to, our perspective in this is that increasingly this is a self-directed journey, as Basil mentioned, that this is everything that coordinators are doing, research coordinators, if there is an in-person event. And what we're finding is increasingly many of these studies are self-directed journeys. So each of those first principles about engendering trust and engagement and a sense of reciprocity is something that the tool has to do. And so it's all about the content and things of that nature. So we're on, our role as a software team is to have the technical capabilities to do that. But now we're, just like in Excel, we also have some templates that after dealing with a few million participants across 100-some studies, that we are beginning to incorporate some starter templates so that a team that's configuring this, a digital first or hybrid experience, incorporates that into the design itself. The IRB and all of the typical values, these are all things that really are important. But if the channel by which we are interacting with participants is increasingly digital, it needs to serve the role that we used to serve during the in-person or phone-based encounters. So it's just that tension or that transition that I think we want to be very thoughtful about. Thanks.
And just building on that a bit further too, these returning information, as you saw, makes it highly personalized, right? We're not just returning generic, we do have patient resources and those are great, but you're able to make things very personalized, right? When we thought about, seeing my own data, right? Participants are very interested in seeing their own data, not just contributing to your research, but actually getting some feedback from that research as well. And that data can be interventional, like we saw, you can track a goal, right? For whether it's steps or something else. Or it can be informational, right? Like we saw with the HR data, right? Just being able to get access to my data and see what's going on with my own health. And, patient resources are wonderful. I definitely encourage people to think about having them. I think these are particularly common when we think about registry and longitudinal studies where there's a chronic disease that someone's managing. Can be really helpful to include those in. Again, really low effort to just add an action to the view builder and have it linked to something. So. But perhaps taking a little bit of my own advice, I'd like to just thank all of you. I mean, I know you all are helping advance health science for these projects, just like participants are. And without your efforts, none of this would be possible. And just, again, really appreciate everything that you're doing. And I would love to just close a little bit with some Q&A now.
Thanks, Basil. I don't